Welcome to Into the Storm Leaders, the no BS podcast that ignites leadership potential and sparks innovation in the ever-evolving business landscape we all work in. I'm Joe Jurek, your host and catalyst for growth, joined by my co-host and Culture Shock senior coach, Pete Hansberger. Together, we embark on a journey to uncover the strategies, mindsets, and actions that drive truly exceptional leadership and winning culture. Whether you're an emerging leader looking to level up in your career or an accomplished executive seeking fresh perspectives, join us as we uncover inspiring stories and thought-provoking insights from proven leaders and share practical takeaways that enable courageous leadership. Get ready to charge into the storm and become a catalyst for better workplace culture. Well, folks, welcome back to another episode of Into the Storm Leaders. We've got Pete Hansberger, Joe Jurek, and we're excited today to have Jeff Kadlic, our guest.
Glad to be here.
From Evolution Capital Partners.
Yep.
I'll let him tell you about that. But we're excited to hear more about your journey, talk about how we got to know each other, how you first came into contact with Culture Shock, and learn from you. So, setting the bar high.
Exactly.
Now, I don't want to bring it too much lower, but we believe we learn from everything, man. Right?
Okay.
Hopefully from this conversation, all of us are like, whoa, that was kind of a point I now want to take some action.
Well, as I shared, I've made all the mistakes, so I've got a lot to share.
Hopefully we'll get a chance to get into a couple of those.
Yeah. I love,
and also hear about some triumph.
No doubt.
I've had a few of those for sure. So
if by some chance this is a listener's first episode, we're going to talk about Into the Storm being something that is this powerful metaphor that brings us all together, and some of Jeff's storms or challenges that he's faced head on. So what we mean by that is when you come across those two different paths, one of which is seemingly more comfortable, the other of which it might be painful at first or uncomfortable, but we know that it leads to a better outcome faster by charging into it. So we'll dig into that as well. But I'll shut up for a minute. Jeff, tell us about you, man. Introduce yourself and whatever you want to kick things off with.
My name's Jeff Kadlic. I've founded Evolution almost 20 years ago. And I was working in a larger private equity fund at the time. And I kept seeing these companies that were smaller that I thought had done something and deserved support, but they were really overlooked by the professional investment community. And so at the time, our managing partner was really like, let's not focus on anything under like 35 million in revenue, because they didn't have the infrastructure or professionalization. And so when I left that firm to start Evolution, sadly, that was really the investment thesis, which was invest in what we called the capital gap. These were companies that you could tell from the valuations that there was not a lot of interest in investing in companies of this particular size. And they were generally 500,000 to 2 million or so of EBITDA or operating profit. Okay. And these businesses had been around for a while, but hadn't really had that success that you would expect after 10 or 15 or 20 years. And so really, when we started Evolution, it was really looking at businesses of that size. And then once we got into these companies, we realized that we were confronting the same challenges over and over and over again. And it was really around, financial reporting, measuring data, collecting data and getting organized reports in front of decision makers when they were making the decision. It was really around budgeting and forecasting, really thinking about the future. Don't sit and focus in on the now all the time. It was HR. It was getting the right people in the right seats. And it was really sales and marketing. The founder was the lead salesperson, right, but they were just doing it through gut and enthusiasm. There wasn't really an organized approach, and it wasn't really translating to other people. So because there was no framework to help these people understand what are the selling points, and do we actually have a CRM system, and do we have a pipeline? So those are all the things that we do today. So it's really kind of venture capital support for private equity businesses. And we really focus on founders who want to stick around, but we bring in a professional president or CEO. The founder's always going to be the founder, but people are good at certain things, and you've gotten it to this point for a reason and didn't get it beyond. And so that's really the conversation that you're having with these founders is, look, we think this business has a lot of potential, but you have to get in the seat that's best for you.
Yeah.
You're always the founder, but your responsibilities might change. So that's worked well for us. What worked less well, but we had some of our biggest successes this way, was where the founder was continuing on, and we tried to transition the founder to CEO, professional CEO.
Okay.
And 80% of the time it doesn't work, because the reason that they're still where they are after 20 years is because they weren't the type of executive to take it from $1 million of EBITDA or operating profit to 5 or 10. Doesn't make them a bad person. It just takes a different skill set.
No
and
doubt.
most of the people that are founders are salespeople, natural salespeople that have been, they're just gregarious and have a great idea,
Right.
and they outwork, or an engineer, somebody that is able to change physical asset and make it better, and that they didn't go to MBA school, right? So they don't know or appreciate accounting or budgeting. They don't understand or care about CRM systems. They only invest in things that generate revenue. They don't really view or think there's an ROI around a controller or an operations person or, something in the back office. But if you're going to professionalize, that is a part of what has to happen during the process. So getting back to evolution, we developed this playbook, really, this professionalization now that we call Evolution Pro, because evolution is this living laboratory called a private equity fund, where we take our best stuff, if you will, and put it into our methodology, and that's what we use to level up the businesses that we invest in. And as you guys know, business is hard, private equity is hard, and sometimes we have enormous successes, and sometimes we have complete failures. But on average, we've done well enough that we're still here after 20 years.
Yeah.
I imagine that approach raised some eyebrows too at the time when, did you have anybody questioning that decision to go out on your own and to invest in some of those smaller organizations versus play in the same atmosphere that you were playing in before that?
Yeah. And the reason is that working with small businesses, making small investments, there's less economics in it.
Sure.
As the investment professional, if I'm managing $1 billion fund and I make a $100 million investment, get it to $200 million, well, I've created $100 million profit. Whereas if I have a $30 million fund and I get it to $90 million, well, I've created 60. I've done 3 times my money, but I've only created $60 million of profit.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's much more intensive. I mean, private equity historically is governance, M&A, capitalization. They're not doing foundational things like we are, to your point. And so the model is hard. I mean, you have to have a passion for working with founders and really working, elbow to elbow with these teams, because, you're not making huge bets. You're hoping to really get 4, 5, 6, 7 times your money to generate the kind of incentive compensation that private equity professionals hold near and dear.
Yeah.
Right. That carried interest is really, you don't make a ton of money in private equity unless you are successful, and the carried interest is very, very valuable.
There's a lot there to unpack. I think that sets the stage for the whole episode. And surely we'll ask some other things too, but boy, the thought process of going from whale hunting or the higher dollar, more typical standard of private equity to those with higher risk, higher reward, 5x, 7x sort of potential. There's a need there, right? I think that's something you can't ignore, is a lot of those founders, I imagine, even if it's not as right in their face that they have that need, it's probably not as often offered, right? It's not as common for them to seek
there's
out.
a lot to unpack in what you just said there, because for me, I've often wondered why we don't attract more venture capital investors.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we're venture capital without the zeros. Now, I've had a zero, but venture is like you have 10 investments, 1 or 2 you get 10 times your money, and then everything else is a zero.
Sure.
We've admittedly have volatility in our returns. If you're an investor in the fund, you're going to be okay. But we have a lot of co-investors that invest in that deal, and their exposure to evolution and experience is really through that one deal. So we obviously try very hard on every deal, but if everybody's an investor in the fund, I might say, wow, I can create $4 million of value here over the next 4 years, or $40 million of value over here for the next 4 years. Where am I going to spend my time?
Right.
Over here. Well, I'm going to get rid of that, which is really what VC does, is they just start writing off and focus on the winner and build momentum. And all of private equity or portfolio management theory is around that. But, we do that same thing. If everybody is a fund investor, but we've got 75 investors, some are in the fund and some just co-invest.
Yeah.
So that's one of them. I think that our style of investing is exciting. It is needed. There is a economic development aspect to what we do.
Right.
We do measure job creation. That's important to us.
That's cool.
We really view that business owners, entrepreneurs are really cornerstones of a community, right? Because a job is more than a job. It creates structure in your life. I mean, if you know anybody who's really, really rich that doesn't work anymore, sometimes they fly off the rails. Anybody that's unemployed, can fly off the rails. So job creators, entrepreneurs, founders, they create jobs, they create structure in a community. They can do a lot of good if they're good at their job. They can level people up. They can give them extra training. They put food on the table. They make people, develop confidence. And if you're going to be in space that we're in, those kind of things have to be important to you.
Right.
Because you're not gonna, get loaded on one deal. You'll do fine in a fund and you'll do really well over a series of funds, but you gotta have a passion for what we do.
We talk about this all the time, that's a value we hope or wish that every leader, every founder had. And I think many do. You give the positive benefit of the doubt there, but some of those hard decisions you have to make about layover or layoffs and, when there's job elimination, when there are just difficult things within the business, realizing the livelihood and well-being of so many people, this, not just the workforce, but the community that surrounds it. And that's been one of the coolest things through this podcast that we've gotten to hear from some of these different founders and entrepreneurs is how, one in particular, when we were talking with Accutech about how they feel so grateful to the community that helped them grow, that they're looking for ways to reinvest and put back into that community to say thank you and keeping it at a local. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about kind of with Evolution Capital Partners, where do you find most of that focus? You're based in Cleveland, right?
Yep.
You from here?
No, I'm not from here.
Where?
I moved here in 2000.
Okay. From where?
My dad worked for U.S. Steel, and so he got transferred every 18 months growing up. And so a survival skill for me was meeting new people and engaging. And that's, I didn't realize at the time, but it was a training ground for what helped me out probably most in business, which was meeting people and being able to talk to anybody. My kids laugh at me, who all grew up in Cleveland. They didn't move around like I did.
Right.
And they're like, how do you talk to anybody about anything? And it's just like, I learned it.
Right.
Yeah.
You didn't realize it, as I said, when you're doing it, but yeah, you learn. But you said something really interesting before about, people giving back. It's easy to do when things are going well, right? When things aren't going well, that's, into the storm, that is where it gets hard. Right? Because oftentimes that requires personal and financial sacrifice on the part of the founder if they're going to make that decision. And once you make that decision, the bigger decision is, when does it stop? How long can you give?
Yeah.
How long? I mean, it's time and money, right?
Right.
How long? When do these people, whoever they might be, have taken enough and I've got to stop because, I'm going to go down.
Right.
At
some point, you're not going to be able to continue supporting, continue helping in those ways.
At some point, performance has to be there, right?
Yeah.
And so that is the challenge that a lot of founders have is, and that's why you need a board of advisors. That's why you need core values, because that guides you at a very high level about your decision-making process. And I've been very fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of people that are willing and able to be very frank with me, and that's helped me out about some of the decisions that I've made. And I think they enjoy being my advisor because I listen. I respond to what they say. But again, everybody in their career will go through tough times, and it's like, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to be ruthless? Are you going to be compassionate? Do you have empathy?
Yeah.
All those things that we're talking about pre-show about, being vulnerable. I've been Mr. Tough Guy my whole life because I always lifted weights as an athlete and blah, blah, blah. I've cried in meetings, business is a passionate thing as I ever experienced in sports because it's real lives, right? It's real paychecks. It's real. Founders have this vision of what they're supposed to be in the future. And when you have to, as empathetic as you can be, explain to them that that's not real.
Right.
That you're not, I've watched you for 2 years. I've tried to help you. You're just not going to get there. That doesn't make you a bad person, but
right.
Taking away somebody's vision of themselves, not taking away, but trying to really help them self-reflect on who they are and really what their potential is tough business.
Sounds like filling in some of the blind spots every once in a while too.
Yeah.
People that have these grand visions of, I'm going to hit it big with this, or this idea is so brilliant that it cannot fail. And what you were saying, not to get off topic, reminded me a little bit of the beginning of the pandemic. A lot of our clients are small to mid-sized businesses, and we had some choices early on, and we were impacted as well, being at the time almost entirely a live event, live meeting business. And I remember going and talking to Ron, our founder, and going to all of our clients and saying, look, we're going to help you out in the short term. Like, let us know what you need. We'll do sessions virtually. We'll do things, at no cost in some cases if you need it, because we want to help you figure out how to stay in business and how to do this. And of course, that had to come to an end at some point, the no fee sessions. But just that act of generosity on our end, it kept us busy as well and strengthened relationships and connections. That ended up probably helping us 3 or 4-fold. Just good things coming back to us because we were trying to be there for clients in the short term. Did you experience any of that early 2020?
It's funny. When I think about a lot of situations, I think about time, right? Is it short, medium, long term? In the short term, it's easy to be giving. It's easy to have empathy. And March of 2020, you're like, I'll give you my shirt off my back and you can have it. Keep it. It's all yours, right?
Fast forward.
And then end of 20, you're like, I don't know, and then end of 21, you're just like, no, I'm like done. I'm like completely spent. And so you can see the best or the worst. It is the divider, really tough times. Right. Warren Buffett said when the tide goes out, you can see who's wearing a bathing suit or whatever that quote was. Right. But it's also you start to see character.
You find out more about yourself and others during prolonged crisis.
Exactly.
For sure. And you hit on it being often people's self-awareness, lack thereof, or just image perception of themselves. You find values are aspirational instead of real, right?
Yeah.
And that's something like I feel very grateful for some of the discipline, the process and systems that Pete and the team here have showed me with EOS around how do we get just unapologetically honest about what a company's core values truly are, who embodies them, that even absent the leadership team, they step back, they know this is who we are. And it's tested through some of the times like that. And like, we're going to open this up more. And I'm just curious whether we're recording or not about some of the things with Evolution Capital, you know, like, and because I'm sure you've had just some highs, some lows with the wins of different clients you've worked with and what you've learned from that. Before we go too far down that road, and I promise we will come back to it, when you talked about 20 years ago, so that's no short stint. You started Evolution 20 years ago. You've probably learned a whole hell of a lot since then. Was that, let's talk about that time before. Like, you mentioned being at a firm. Was this your first leap into kind of an entrepreneurial space? Had you done anything like that in the past? Or do you recall what that push was for you to kind of take the chance, stand something up on your own and say, rather than do it for or with somebody else, I want to build it? Like, talk to me a little bit about your entrepreneurial background.
So it's funny you bring that up because I went to Miami University. I'm very involved down in Oxford. I'm very proud alum. I wear it on my sleeve all the time. And I'm now the chairman of the Entrepreneurship School Advisory Board. I took the first, or maybe the second, I can't remember, entrepreneurship class that was taught by John Altman, who was this very successful entrepreneur and who the Entrepreneurship Institute is named after today. And we developed a friendship at the early part of my career, and he was just an inspiring guy. And I don't know if it's because I moved a bunch growing up or it was him or a combination of a lot of different things, but I think unknown to me, it resided in me that I had to go try to do something. I don't think I was aware of it at the time. But even when I started my career, some of my early successes were, let's look at this in a different way, right? They call that corporate entrepreneurship. I'm in a corporate environment and they're like, let's put this on its head and look at it from this way. And I would have, success doing that. And then that brought me to another place, because what makes entrepreneurship in education so important, and 4,000 kids a year take at least one class in Miami University around entrepreneurship, is because it teaches you to deal with not having all the information. It teaches you to deal with the unknowns. It teaches you to deal with the resource-constrained environment. And we know that's what life is like.
Right.
But a kid growing up, their parents protect them even more so today than they used to in terms of what the real world is like. And then when you take an exam, all the things you need to know to get 100% are on that piece of paper.
Right.
That's not
it's in the literature.
The real world works. And so I think more and more kids are realizing that, I got to learn this stuff, whether you're a nursing student, you're an engineer, you're in fashion design. These students are taking entrepreneurship. So when I finally got in private equity in, call it 2000 full time, I just watched and I was just kind of learning. I had really done everything there was to do at a very early part of my career, because I was in great organizations with great mentors and I got a lot of at-bats. They had a lot of deal flow, so I could see a lot of stuff, right? And so by the time I got to this place, I really started to have a good handle on what makes sense to me as it relates to how a company should work. And so I eventually just said, you know what, I've got to go do this on my own. And I really believe when people go through transitions, you're running to something or running from something. And I was definitely running to something, but the things that were going on in the organization that doesn't exist anymore accelerated that transition before I was ready. And so when I started Evolution, I went without a paycheck for 15 months. It was really, wow. Of course, I waited to have the nice house. I waited to have 4 kids. I waited to have things that cost money before I made this really great decision to totally risk it all and start something on my own. But, again, that's my wife stepped in. She started painting paintings and selling them on eBay, and, she paid the mortgage. And
no kidding.
Oh, yeah. She was my
that was some early eBay days, too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. This is back in 2005.
So she had that entrepreneurial mindset
she's
too,
more of an
right?
entrepreneur than I am. I mean, I have some like ground rules now where it's like, she's just like, she'll start anything from anything. And, she's been successful and she's been really, really good at it, but she definitely helped us, through that transition. But I guess I would say, entrepreneurs are a little bit, mavericky, that we're control investors because unless we had, a legal right to make certain decisions, these entrepreneurs are hard to lasso and wrestle to the ground.
Ain't that the truth? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you guys see it every day with what you guys do here at Culture Shock,
and we get lassoed internally too.
Oh, no doubt.
For the best reasons.
Yeah.
When it's needed.
But you made up a point earlier about, about self-reflecting. I mean, having that conversation over a period of a series of meetings or a series of weeks and months and years is a much easier conversation than right now. To try to take a year's worth of therapy and bring it into an hour conversation is really, really difficult to do. But that happens. You can't control time. Again, getting back to time, can't control time. And there could be a reason where, okay, this person is not going to receive this information very well. So I need to kind of explain our thought process,
right,
and readjust how they view themselves in their world. And most of the time they reject it, right? But they'll come around eventually and say, okay, maybe some of what you said is true, right?
Right.
Now, you're not saying, hey, you're a bad person. You're saying, you know what? Maybe sales isn't your thing, right? Or, maybe you should get out of the accounting department.
Some of that, it takes time because they're not ready to hear that feedback until you've built a little bit of a relationship. And then over time, as you start to earn their trust, they're willing to hear that better than they were on day one.
Well, you talked about, Into the Storm, right? And so Into the Storm for me, and without getting specifics because of confidentiality agreements and just, people in general, transitioning people is the hardest thing that we do, right? I mean, whether you're firing somebody, hiring somebody, buying somebody out for a price less than they feel like they deserve. I mean, those are all really tough things. And what I always tell our leaders is everybody's watching. Good times, are you congratulating people?
Right.
Bad times, are you maintaining control and not yelling and screaming? Are you allowing this bad employee, but valued employee that's kind of a little loose and goose around the rules? Are you going to reel them in? And that requires energy, right? It's like grounding your kids. Oh, God. I have to ground my kid, which means I actually have to pay attention. I have to get up off the ground from watching the football game,
right,
and go make sure they're in their room. It just requires,
and withstand
energy.
The negative energy you might be getting back from them in the moment.
But also, particularly when you're firing somebody, I hate doing it, but it's a must. And you're at a high level of risk when you go into those meetings that they're going to sue for whatever reason. You could be perfect, but so I've made it, even though I hate it, I think everybody hates it, should hate it. Otherwise you're kind of a weirdo, is that you have to be at the most, when you are most at risk as an organization, you have to step in. If we are at the most at risk during those transition periods, I have to be there. I don't want to be the pointed spear. I'm not an ego guy that way. I've done it enough that it's just not great for me. But you have to step in to that breach. And so you said something earlier that caught my attention, which is if we've got a company out of state somewhere, and we're not getting along with the founder, and the founder's, marching around the office saying, big bad private equity fund, that Jeff guy, he's a real jerk. The people in that office, who do you think they're going to listen to? Listen to the founder.
Person who's there.
Right. Yeah. That's the version of their truth, right? I am the big bad private equity fund coming in town and making changes, and everybody's at risk, and they're listening to this person. So the only way to deal with that, as we talk, as a team, is every time we go, we're professional, we're on time, we're prepared, we treat everybody with respect. You dot all I's and cross all T's, and eventually, over time, people will realize that, okay, what he's saying doesn't make sense, right?
Sure.
And, these people at Evolution, really seem to be pros.
You're credible. You've built trust through your actions.
Like,
with them,
for example,
right?
don't go on a meeting and say, that founder, I don't know, he's, never say.
Right.
No
Participate in that.
playing those games.
Never. Just focus on being a professional, and, it'll work out. It'll work out.
It does start to build influence of those around you, even in limited interactions, right?
Hearts and minds is what I say. We got to go out and win the hearts and minds, because it happens. I mean, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors, and, there's a lot that goes into a decision to change people out or make a transition. And, my ultimate boss is, well, our core values as an organization, the law, but our investors, right? And so when I make transitions, some part of my reasoning when I share with people is like, I'm a fiduciary. I like you personally, but I have to act.
Yeah.
My investors expect me to act. As a fiduciary, I have to act. And they start to get it a little bit when you separate the two, which is like, let's I'd love to have a beer with you, but it's not working out.
Yeah.
And if I've got months and months and months to work with somebody, you're kind of layering in, hey, we talked about this a couple months ago and it hasn't really changed. So let me help you out, and, let's reconvene in another month. By the time, if you've done your job, by the time you've fired somebody, they know it's coming. I mean, it makes it so much easier on both sides.
There's been clear expectations.
Right.
There's
but
check-ins.
if you go in there and you're fired, and they're surprised, it's your fault. It's my fault.
Yeah.
Right. But sometimes that happens where
Often.
somebody acts out. I mean, if you've been in business long enough, you've dealt with a lot of weird situations.
Right.
Sometimes you have to act with urgency, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like within an hour, out the door. But if you can, give people the benefit of the doubt. Work, particularly if they want to do it. There's a lot of people that are just kind of going through the motions, but the tough ones are when they're really trying and they're just not getting it.
That you hit on. Boy, we didn't queue you up for this. I don't think prior to today I shared much about kind of like our program for emerging leaders and things, but there's something called Path to Positive Accountability. And so often people jump straight to the accountability conversation where it's like, oh, go hold somebody accountable, go correct this. You need to have urgency. And maybe they hesitate or hold back knowing that they own a piece of this, but now because they've worn kid gloves or not been direct and upfront about it, when push does come to shove and action needs to happen, this person's gonna be like, what are you talking about? Why didn't you tell me?
Right.
And the first step of this thing that we called the Into the Storm conversation is prepare your heart and mind to impact hearts and minds. Remember that we're meant to serve, not to please. And as a fiduciary, it's a little more clearly inherited as a responsibility, but it's a responsibility of every leader. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was one of the things personally I didn't recognize in my early leadership career. And we talk about Radical Candor by Kim Scott. I fell in the ruinous empathy quadrant where although I would build trust with my team and had high engagement and things, I wasn't great at embracing conflict. I'd look the other way or pull punches. And I think all leaders need to have that recognition, like getting their heart and mind ready for these conversations is this isn't because, I'm a jerk. It's not because I'm doing something to you. It's recognition that I'm doing something for you or for others involved here, and it's my responsibility to speak up. It's so much easier said than done, right? And that I can relate to the crisis of, you have a plan, but in difficult, intense moments, it's much hard to follow through, right? So we talk about it often to keep it alive. I think we resort to our training, we resort to our tools in those moments. Anything that you've found help you throughout your career? I'm sure today it's kind of so automatic, it like the back of your hand, and you remember those triggers to get your heart and mind ready and things. But when you first got into private equity, first started recognizing that a huge part of your role is helping people see things from an angle they might not want to see from, and that you are serving them even if it doesn't please them. Is there anything that you do to like mentally prepare, or a model or that you try to follow, or just something that might help others who shy away from or don't as regularly come into those like really intense, difficult conversations?
So I will say EOS was really great in middle part of my career because of the system, right? I mean, even Gino's like, these particular things I stole from other people, but he put them together in a really elegant way. Right. And I'd say to people, this is like a mini MBA, in a book, a 210-page book, as I recall. It's really, really great. I would say a few things. One, and I don't have a system. I guess my fallback is I work harder than probably anybody I know. Now, I'm not saying I work, I shouldn't say harder, but I work as hard as anybody I know. I don't think that I'm the smartest person in the room, but I spend more time thinking deeply about a subject than anybody else in that room. And so I rarely go into a meeting anymore where I haven't thought pretty hard about whatever we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
And so that also goes back to your acceptance that tension needs to be there if you're going to grow as a professional. There's that, analogy or phrase where the turtle can only advance if they stick their neck out of their shell.
Right.
It's you got to be out there and be vulnerable and be uncomfortable. And so I say to people, look, tension is good, anxiety is bad. And so you just need to find, where you are, in that spectrum. There's a few times where I got out to anxiety, either intentionally because I was pushing myself, or unintentionally where a lot of stuff got on my plate at once. And, when it's at night and you're tired, you're at your most vulnerable, and you start thinking about everything is going to go against you and not one thing is going to go with you. Right. And that's never the case. But the more deeply you think about something, the better the solution that you're going to come up with. So when I talk to young people at Miami University or anywhere else, I say my desire to work hard, my ability to work hard is 75% of my success. And if you control 75% of your future, right, you can control how successful you are. But you have to put in the time. I mean, there's no very successful, well-rounded person that said, I didn't work hard. Right? They always say that. And so if you're willing to do that hard work, and you can define it any way you want, I have my own definitions, but you'll control your future. You'll control the level of success that you want. But some people call me a workaholic, and getting work-life balance is important, but there's a spectrum, right? Hey, I don't need to go to Hawaii and I want to work 35 hours a week and feel no stress. Or, hey, I want to travel around the world once a year and I need to make a ton of money to live the lifestyle I want, and I need to go, go, go. There's a spectrum in there that you need to figure out where you're happiest, right? And sometimes, life pulls you in one of those directions.
Sure.
Right? There's been points in my life where I haven't been as busy as I'd like to be, and I feel like I'm falling behind. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, I would love to have a day where I didn't get an email. It just doesn't happen. Right. So those are two extreme examples, but that is what I would say to people. It's just, I get up at 4:30 on Mondays, and I'm excited to get up because I have 3 hours to just quiet time, to think. And then Tuesdays at 5, Wednesday at 5:30, 6:30. It's like, that's my week.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I'm curious too, the relationship between tension and anxiety. You mentioned it reminded me of that feeling right before you go out onto the field or go out onto the court playing an athletic event. And when we get, a keynote session, or we have, a high stakes training opportunity that we're going to get involved in, I get that feeling, that pregame feeling where I know it's good for me. And it sometimes it might feel like stress or anxiety, but most of the time it's probably tension, and it gets you excited to go about. You mentioned, your own background in athletics and exercise, things like that. Can you get into any of that? And has that shaped your career at all, or your excitement to sort of get up for the big meeting or the big session?
Yeah, I'll give you a few examples. I was the last kid to go through puberty, I think, in my entire middle school long ago. And I was bullied. It's middle school, right? And so I started lifting weights and exercising, and it got to the point by the end of high school, nobody was messing with me. I wasn't a bully, but no one's going to mess with me either. And that really just started this need to work out. And to me now, working out is as mental stress relief as it is anything else. Like, my wife and I get in an argument, she's like, just go run. She's like, she's right. And I come back and everything's great.
You got a clear head.
Yeah. Right. And so it's great to stay physically healthy. I think that if you're going to put in the long hours that you have to be successful today, then being physically fit, is important. I think for the stress level, I think whether it's swimming, running, biking, walking, whatever, just you got to find time to eliminate that stress. I mean, for me, it's reading, and it's being physically active, being out, doing things. Those are the two things that when the world is going nuts, if I do those two things, I'll be able to, find my point north, so to speak, using a compass analogy. So those things are kind of become core, to who I am as a person. You talk about getting up for, the big event. Public speaking has not always been, I've always got something to say, of course, but there is a journey in there. Like, you don't want to start your first big meeting or big presentation doing the State of the Union, right? You want to, take your little, and so I see a lot of young people complain about, wow, I've got this small territory, I've got this small job. Like, that's what you want.
Yeah.
They're not expecting anything out of you. So go to the smallest territory, go to the smallest client, make something happen.
Right, go
and
own
practice. And if you screw it up, nobody's going to notice, because the expectations are nothing.
Yeah.
Right? And same thing you do public speaking. It's like, just, go speak to this handful of kids at Miami University. You could be saying completely off the wall stuff and they have no clue. Right?
Right.
But it's a journey to build yourself up to the point where you can be the keynote speaker, you can lead that meeting, that sort of stuff. So, I say to young people, your career is a marathon, not a sprint. Right. And there's times that I sprinted and got way over my skis. And that's where the anxiety piece comes in. You just got to understand, where you are in your profession and what you think you're capable of. But God forbid your first big meeting is, or your first meeting is the big one. Right.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, it's about reps, it's about practice, and it's about, you're going to make mistakes and just move past that and learn from it and figure out, what settles you down. And hopefully it's healthy stuff and it's not, alcohol and drugs, whatever the case may be. And I think we all know from talking to founders and entrepreneurs, there is an element, of that in this culture that you have to be aware of or see signs of in the people that you work with, right? I mean,
the work hard, play hard can get out of control.
Yeah. I mean, I get on these roller coasters. Everybody that's around me for a second knows that I'm like torqued up on caffeine, and you're not going to come off that caffeine before midnight. I can tell you that unless you have a beer or two or three or whatever. And so getting off that train is a constant struggle, right? It's like, can I get to bed early so I can get a good night's sleep? So I need to have caffeine, but some of course happens. And, anyway,
shortcuts have appeal, but they're never going to be the long-term or sustainable thing, right? And I personally have experienced it quite a bit. It's that either the caffeine or the late night, the grind it out, even though I know in myself, like when I'm at my best. And that process or practice of being more intentional, kind of mapping out where you want to be, where you want to go, what some of your long-term and short-term goals are and things like that. But also like I think we do a SWOT analysis in business all the time, but kind of like a personal SWOT analysis to own and recognize some of your strengths, but some of your weaknesses as well, but then also ask others to validate, right? To help you understand, are you self-aware or is there something where you're totally off the mark in? I think earlier in our career, we get accountability, we get lots of criticism, lots of advice from everywhere. And the more and more senior you get, the less you hear it naturally from others, unless you have some sort of feedback mechanism, unless you have that network of influence where, I want you to shoot me straight. I want you to tell me if I'm effing up. Right. That I've just, always a work in progress, never finish. But some of that hit home, right? When you're talking about it, because I realize it's so easy to, it kind of the excitement, the feeling of building something and things like that to push yourself too far, where there's like a point of diminishing returns. And if you don't take care of like having clarity breaks, eating right, and things like that. I mean, I've noticed where I'm like, oh, well, that's why. That's why I'm not at my, peak performance right now, or I'm not thinking as clearly about things. So I think that's a super valuable kind of like insight or tip for people to be reminded of. Because the most frustrating thing for me is when we know something and we still fail to act on it. We need that kick in the ass sometimes. That how do we keep it fresh? And I think that stuff will always be important.
I think letting people know that you're receptive to honest criticism is really important. I've been very fortunate to have a lot of advisors, and I think they have enjoyed advising me because I react, to what they say, and they're able to say the hard stuff, to me, and I let them know that it's okay. As long as it's coming from the right place, just tell me. You can say anything if you say it the right way, and you get really good feedback. It's that Johari window, that you talk about in EOS, and you have to understand how you're perceived by others, to really get a 360 scope on how are you performing, how do I maximize my performance, that sort of thing. So I know, for example, a lot of people say I'm really tense, and I know that I am. So having that awareness, you can soften it, or you can amplify it, in the right situation.
Strategically,
but unless somebody told me that, yeah, Jeff, you're pretty tense, I wouldn't know that. To me, that's like totally normal.
Right. Well, it could even be perceived as a strength in every situation, right? I think the things that got us to where we are won't necessarily get us to what's next, but there's unintended consequences of some of the things that even are greatest strengths. Right. Like I learned that with Colby. It's kind of validating for me to see some of the things that I was either ashamed of or embarrassed about, where it's like, okay, lean forward in that, but also maybe dial this back sometimes.
What's your 4 numbers?
A 5392.
7352. 7354. Sorry, 7354.
I'm a 6374.
So initiating fact finder.
Yeah.
Right? You need the research, give you the book, let you understand it well enough.
I'm called a strategist only because at least that's what I call myself, because the other 3 numbers aren't 6 or above.
Fair.
Right.
Fair.
But as a quick start 5, I do pretty well taking these crazy ideas and actually making them be able to go forward.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Professionalizing them a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say too, on the note about, the willingness to receive feedback and respond well to it. When we tell the Into the Storm story to any clients we work with, we talk about charging into it would be the combination of bold and humble. And there's a lot of humility in that from our standpoint. And it sounds like from what you're saying too. I mean, you could say to somebody who's giving you advice, look, I've been doing this 20 years. I don't need to hear from you, and you're probably at the point in your career where you could say, look, I've won more than I've lost when it comes to our business, and I'm not interested in hearing additional opinions. But I imagine a lot of the power and a lot of good information comes from having that humility, because we talk about it takes a humility to get out of your comfort zone. It takes a humility to be willing to talk to people that you've never met before and ask good questions, and you never know where you might learn something. And so it's almost just as important for us when we're talking about charging into the storm as not being the bull in the china shop where we're just wildly sprinting forward, but being willing to put our ego in our back pocket and get feedback, just like we want to be aggressive and we want to be assertive and go chase after the things that we want to solve. Anything else that you have on the humility note, or maybe an example of when taking somebody's advice or feedback really worked out for you?
So a couple comments there, and I'll get to your question in a second. Fear of failure is really, you have to get comfortable with failure or something less than what you vision success to be. And as soon as you get comfortable with that, you'll grow, right? If you did it perfect the first time, then there's nowhere else to go, right? But if you did it slightly less than you think you could do it, then you got to do it again. Mm-hmm. And so there's so many people that are afraid to fail. They just can't stomach doing the cold call. They just can't stomach, doing that presentation. And you've got to figure out a way to say, it's okay. It's not existential. I'm not hurting anybody's feelings. I'm the only one that's damaged, and I forgive myself. Yeah, I think that is really an important aspect, of being able, to grow. The other thing about growing and what I see in the best leaders is that the way they analyze a situation is they look at it from everybody else's perspective, not from theirs, right? It's like, if I'm going to fire somebody, let's look at it from their side. What are they going to say? What should I say?
Sure.
To make this a better, more productive, conversation. I'm going to go into this meeting and this person is going to respond this way because I think this is how they're feeling. I heard them say something along this lines in the past, and how am I going to respond to that to make it not about me? Right. And so what I see so much in life today and in business in particular is, one, this complete lack of accountability. And then number 2 is everybody looks at everything from their own lens. If you could change those 2 things, you could probably change the world, right? But so many people are doing it for themselves. And it's about me. I'm being hurt here. I'm the one that is taking the brunt. I am working harder than anybody else.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then when
somehow everybody in the company is working harder than everybody else in the company.
Right. If you solve for those 2 problems, all this stuff that's going on in the world today, domestic and abroad, takes care of itself. Right.
The emotional intelligence piece that goes into that is really, so really huge, important. Right?
And in leadership, instilling that, I think, would be really, really key.
I want to add, you've touched on some characteristics of leaders. We've talked a little bit about EOS. I want to dive into both of those things. But that's the second time you talked about looking at things from different angles, right? And being the Colby that you shared and being the most prepared before things, anticipating objections, things like that. Boy, does that resonate. I'll show you when we get done with this, but I've got this cube on my desk. It looks like a typical Rubik's Cube, but it also splits open. You can look at it from different sides, and there's a sentiment that stuck with me. It's cube the data. Look at it not just from the 6 sides, but see if you can crack that sucker open and look at it from this angle and this angle and this angle. And it's not just the data of numbers and spreadsheets, but it's the interaction, the human component to understand how could somebody else respond to this. And surely we can't anticipate every variable in their life and the emotional state and all that, but we've seen enough, we've experienced enough to kind of draw similarities, kind of a comparison of, like, with a high degree of certainty, I can predict it's going to be one of these things, knowing you could be totally wrong. Mm-hmm. But boy, have I found that to be helpful. And I think that that's something, again, if we can find ways in the moment to remember those things, instead of getting exposed to something and then life happens and we kind of fall back to our normal habits and tendencies, it can be really helpful. That's why I've got the token. That's why I've got the little thing on my desk, so that way I remember, look at this to consider. My purview is only my purview, right?
So I'll give you a couple comments of that. One thing that we teach our companies, our founders, is don't look at an expense as an expense. Look at it as return on investment. It's a 360 view. Like, what is your expectation for what you're getting for expending the capital? Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, okay, rent, I'm paying $5,000 or $10,000 a month. What am I going to get? What am I getting back on that? Is this really what I wanted, or could it have been better? Mm-hmm. I admit developing ROI on office supplies is not easy, but certainly on people, right? Certainly on equipment, technology, you know, and you need to understand how you're measuring it, because then that is a 360 view of, rather than just saying an expense.
Sure.
Right? You don't spend money to get nothing.
Right.
You spend money to get something. Right?
Right.
So maybe office supplies is 1-to-1, but if I hire a salesperson, I want them to generate, for every dollar of expense, I want them to generate $3 of gross profit. Right? If they can't do that within a period of time, then you got to move on. I think your second point about point in time. The other thing that we teach companies is you have to do the discipline the whole time. So when you're at that point, you're ready, right? So companies generate a treasure trove of data every day, and 99% of entrepreneurs just throw it away. Right? They're not paying attention to it. They got it all up here. It's all gut, right? And when people go to Vegas with gut, they don't last very long.
Right.
Right. But if you are educating yourself with the information that your company generates every day, when you come time to make that big decision, you're not going to have all the information, right? You're going to have maybe 50% of it. But if you're reviewing this data that your company is generating and know what has ultimately happened, you're going to make an educated guess. It's going to be a really good one, right? So don't wait for that moment. Start doing the things now, because eventually you're going to need it. I don't know when. I don't know if it's going to pay off, but it's not going to be a negative, right? So just do it. And more often than not, there's a great ROI around preparation to lead up to that event. And if you talk to very successful entrepreneurs, they're going to say, I didn't have all the answers, but I'm pretty sure I knew it was going to happen because I've been looking at this data forever, right? And it was just, I had it.
Jeff, I'm sure a lot of this is boots on the ground experience, living it, going through failures, learning, getting better. The entrepreneurship being one of the, not only down at Miami University, giving back, and I'm surely learning through that aspect of it, but also being one of the first classes. We talk about peak leadership. We talk about the characteristics we strive to emulate. Outside of those things, like clearly the discussion that we're having today, while yes, there's some emphasis on the sort of work that you do, and so outside of those things,
are there individuals that you're fortunate enough to work for at an early stage in your career or even adversity, when you think about who you strive to emulate and how you've gained a lot of who you are as a leader? Where does it come from? What's peak leadership to you? Or like what peak leadership experiences have you had that come to mind?
As I said, I was very fortunate early in my career to have people that really looking out for me. The person that comes to mind is a guy named Hal Stebbin. He's retired, and I have not kept up with him after a period of time, but he knew what I was before I did in terms of, I was a guy that was going to develop business and generate opportunities. And when I got to Chicago to work for LaSalle Bank, which doesn't exist anymore, LaSalle didn't give you a territory, or they didn't give you customers. They just said, go out and you build your own. I didn't know anybody in Chicago. Certainly nobody of importance, right? And you go into the CRM system or whatever it was called at the time, and everybody had staked their claim on all these really, really important people. And I'm like, okay, whatever. But he let me just explore about who I could be, knowing that I was going to come to him when there was a decision to be made. And so as I'm processing response to your question, it was really, as a leader, allowing people to explore and grow, understanding that they're going to make a mistake and that you may have to go in and save their ass. But there's a certain trust level that they're going to come back to you, but allowing them to try and fail and grow is an important part of my experience, and Hal let me do that. I mean, I ended up calling on banks in Ohio, where I had graduated from Miami, and some of my buddies had gotten into banking, and LaSalle was Chicago Metro Bank. And I started thinking, wow, there's a lot of banks in Cleveland and Columbus and Cincinnati. I'm sure they're competing and they don't want to share a credit. So I would go to a bank in Columbus, Ohio, and say, hey, do you have any loans that you don't want, you're holding more than you want to, you want to sell it down?
Yeah.
And the first deal I did was with, I think it was Bank One, and it was Longaberger baskets. It was a company that makes.
My mom used to sell those.
Kind of like Tupperware.
Yeah.
Don't they have the big basket?
Yeah.
Corporate office.
I financed that. Yay. So I hustled as soon as I hustled, and my friends were hitting a happy hour in Chicago, and I was exploring this idea that I had, and Hal let me do it. I mean, I was 25. Right. Yeah. And he was letting me get on a plane. I could have been going to the bars in Cleveland. He wouldn't have known, right? But I was working this, and I would report back to him. I think based on how I reported, he knew that I was actually doing something.
Right.
And so, as my job as a leader is to really support as best I can everybody that's in the organization, as long as they share the core values, and I think that they're in the right seat. And if I don't allow them to do that, if I cut them off the knees, if they make a decision, or if I disagree with the decision, but it's been set up that it's their decision and it's not an existential threat, it's like, okay, let's see where this goes, and maybe it'll work itself out. But there is an element of everybody is going to develop their own pace, their own skill sets, and you need to let people grow. One, to be happy, two, to get better, and three, hopefully, the whole organization is lifted because of that. And it's really hard to do.
It is.
Right. It's kind of like your kids, and you're like, God, I wouldn't do that if I were you, but he's gonna hurt himself.
Probably going to skin your knee there.
In this situation, I'm watching from over here, so that way, when it goes the way I know it's going to, you're there.
Well, so both of our kids are both 4 and under. I've got 2, he's got 2, and they're all 4 or younger, and we're getting into that part of our lives right now, where they're just constantly jumping off of things and
Yeah,
running
they go
and
from crawling to sprinting.
yeah. And sometimes I'm saying, don't do that, or I get in front of them. And sometimes I'm just like, well, let's see if it works out for you, you know, but you sort of the calculated risk a little bit.
If happens to them, and let's say they get in a car, the consequences obviously are sometimes very unfair.
Mm-hmm.
And so these little things are okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If it just, you know, as long as it's little, you're okay. It's going to be okay. We're going to be fine. It went horribly, but here's how I would do it differently. And you can do this, right? That cycle of making sure that people aren't afraid to fail, right? That's very hard to do. And how let me do that?
You probably earned it through some demonstration of wanting it, of hustle, right? I think that people naturally will give more energy to let things fail, to, you know, share wisdom and things when they can tell somebody's going to listen, do something with it, right? That recurring theme keeps coming up. So many people delegate ineffectively, but don't own it, don't take accountability for, you know, their part to play, and become jaded and cynical, and then their ceiling.
Right. Most people
down.
delegate because they don't do the work. The way to go about it is, I'm delegating it to you because I want you to grow as a professional. That's the reason to do it. I can do it better than you, right? Because I've done it 1,000 times. But I want you to do it, not necessarily because I don't want to do it, but you need to know how to do this and well.
Yeah.
Right. And if you never do that, if you skip this step because you don't like it, you're going to be worse off in the long run.
Have you been surprised by the outcome when somebody came back, and even though you knew how to do it better from trial and error, they had a different point of view or a way they innovated?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in unique abilities, and you know, I tend to be a little bit more the jack of all trades, king of none kind of person, and
but oftentimes better than a master of one is that last part, right? That always gets left off.
Yes, I am often, if people appreciate why you're doing it, the right people will come back with a better answer. You know, if they look at just like sloughing work off on me because he doesn't want to do it and blah, blah, blah. But if they understand and appreciate that this is a learning moment and they could fail, but you have to do this. And if you don't do it, you know, you're skipping steps in the process is going to make you an exceptional professional. Those are the people that you want to have around you.
Yeah.
Right.
That mentality seems to work with, you know, on the flip side too, when someone's heart truly is in the right place, whether it's we work with a lot entrepreneur or a mid-manager, emerging leader, they'll say, I don't want to give away this work because I feel guilty. Like, I don't want to make someone else do the work that I should be doing, in which case it seems like the mentality also works in that regard too, where it's, you know, if you don't do this, you're missing out on opportunities to help other people grow.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I'm the one that I feel badly, you know, delegating some stuff when I know I could do it twice as fast and, you know, arguably better. But you know, they gotta have to, you're short sheet and say letting a kid skip a grade or graduate them to the next grade, even though they didn't successfully pass that exam, you're hurting them in the long run. Right? You have to do the work. If you don't do the work, then, you know, you're going to have gaps, right? And so, and people don't do the work because they don't want to fail the test. It's just, I get it, but you know,
Right.
you got to do the work.
That goes back to being uncomfortable a little bit,
Right.
you know, and and you know, getting through that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, with helicopter parents today and the lack of accountability and all these sorts of things, more and more kids are entering into the workforce that feel entitled. You know, they feel, and this is not a blanket statement, but, you know, having college age kids and kids that are out of college, I feel like I've got a unique view on this part of life, is that, you know, they're lacking in a lot of the things that are going to make them successful professionals. And it's not that they don't have the talent, and it may not necessarily be that they don't want to do the work. They just don't know, right? If you've never had to do the work, how are you supposed to know you're supposed to do it, right? If you're parents wrote your term paper, or they did all this sort of stuff, then you're not going to know how to do it, right? You're not going to know how to deal with conflict, right? If your parents sail in and save your butt, you have to learn to do that stuff ultimately. And you can practice it. The training, I'm totally for training. It makes a ton of sense, which you eventually have to do.
Right.
Now. Right. And fortunately, hopefully, you never have to fire somebody. But likely, if you haven't fired somebody, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
We often hold on to people for far too long when it's a detriment to them. It's a detriment to us. Like, that's when you were talking earlier about some of the hardest things being when you have to transition somebody. We talked a little bit about right person, right seat and things. I've personally had some of the best moments of a relationship after we've agreed on a mutual separation of ways. Then finally, kind of the dust settles and we can talk honestly of like, all right, let's find something that's really going to make you happy. Line up with your unique ability for.
Right.
Have you had that as well?
Yeah, but a big part of the way to facilitate a conversation around transition is help them envision what the future's like, right? Yep. Whether someone's retiring, right? Part of the reason they don't retire is that whatever hobbies they have don't give them the same amount of enjoyment as the work.
Yeah.
Right. And if somebody's in your organization and they're not performing and you're not happy with their performance, say, look, this is what you're really good at. I mean, so let's start to think about what this looks like for you in the future.
How do we get excited about what's next?
Exactly. And so ultimately, when the tension is gone and they've moved on and presumably, they're in a happier spot, then there's a little bit more acknowledgement of, it's probably.
Might have needed that push.
Yeah, I might have. Exactly.
Right. Otherwise, I would have just continued to do it. And I was clearly.
So if you can make it a healthy conversation and not confrontational, and not say, hey, look, you're leaving because you're terrible. It's just like, you're not good at this job, right? It doesn't mean you're not good at any job. You're just not good at this job.
Yeah.
Right. And so those kind of conversations, that's where you got to think deeply about these things and helping people. Transitions are hard for anybody.
No doubt.
And so when you've got a friend transitioning, whether they're moving to a new city, they've got, a death in the family or get divorced or whatever, that's when people need to dial in. That's when people need other people, to provide that perspective, that comfort, those words of support. And a transition, whether it's firing or demoting or, whatever, or even promoting.
Yeah.
You have to have those important conversations.
We owe you a thank you for helping somebody we care a lot about on our team transition by getting them excited about what was next. And it was a couple of years ago now, but the way that I was introduced to you and that it sounds like you were introduced to Culture Shock was through Kimberly Dyer.
Yes.
Right? A member of our team. She's a certified Colby consultant, an EOS implementer, a big part of Culture Shock. So tell us more about that. Like when that introduction occurred, you already had some familiarity with EOS, and it sounds like with our founder, Ron. I'd be remiss if I skipped over that part of the story and connection. So anything that you can share there about helping her.
Yeah, Ron is great, as you guys know, and I knew Ron for sure at that point in time, but Kimberly and I met at the Nature Center at Shaker Lakes, which is a nature center in the Heights area of Cleveland, and it's really about 20 acres. And the history is really cool because I'm getting off a tangent here, but it is 20 acres that were set aside by the federal government. But prior to that, they were going to establish a Clark Freeway that connected 271 to 490. And it was going to be a 70-foot high overpass that went right over Shaker Heights, like the nicest parts of Shaker Heights, right over the top of it. And these little old ladies in a garden club, they got the whole community together, and they ultimately succeeded in stopping the Cuyahoga County plan to put in this Clark Freeway. So my house would be a Dunkin' Donuts if it was that was ultimately came to pass. It has great history. I got involved with it because the Heights in general has about 300 acres of wildness, as we call it. And I had been nominated to be president, and then I had the luxury of deciding who my next president would be. And I had been in a meeting, and I was frankly unprepared. And Kimberly was in the same meeting, and she had such command of the details. She had an awareness of what was going on in the community. And I didn't have either one of those things. I was like, wow, Kimberly would be a great complement. I mean, together as a team, I think we could do really, really great things. And part of what I was trying to do as a president was professionalize, as we do at Evolution, professionalize the Nature Center at Shaker Lakes, make it run more like a business. And EOS was an important part of what we were trying to instill in the disciplines there at the Nature Center at Shaker Lakes. And of course, through that process, Kimberly learned, EOS. And then ultimately when I didn't even think she was done being president of the Nature Center at Shaker Lakes.
I think you're right.
She started to transition into being an implementer, and she's obviously been very, very successful. So, so she watched it being implemented first. And then, that she learned it that way as opposed to with the book.
You mentioned earlier how kind of the brilliance was in the assembly or the collection of things, or that Gino Wickman had stated that.
Right.
I'm sure there were components of EOS that you're like, oh, I've naturally done this for quite some time. If I had to guess, based on the information laid out, like the right person, right seat tool, this sounds like has been helpful in sort of your mindset and such.
Yeah.
Is there any other component of EOS that you kind of hang your hat on as something that this was profound, or this had just major recurring benefit for you at Evolution, or if somebody's not familiar with it, as many of our listeners aren't, maybe it's something that helps them dip their toe in, or like check out a tool or something. Is there some facet of it?
EOS is a great system, right? I mean, as we discussed, Gino acknowledges in the book, he took pieces, parts from a lot of different, ideas and put them together, and it's really fabulous. And I remain a huge advocate for EOS. There's a lot, obviously. If I'm promoting it, there's more than one aha.
Right.
But the ones that stick out in my mind, is this whole area around right people, right seats, and putting together an accountability chart. You can't take a favored employee and wrap a job description around what their interests are, right? You have to look at the organization, create different boxes, and then put somebody in the box. And so much of what happens in these smaller businesses where no one's accountable except to the founder, they do what they want to do. And then what happens is they dabble in accounting, they dabble in operations, they dabble in sales, and overall, really ineffective.
Right.
The thing that I'd say is probably the most impactful is somebody that went back, get their MBA, and I thought I was all, had it together, was the core values. I was like, I got my core values, they're on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
See, they're great, right? But unless you live those, it is the organizational, it's the foundation to organize the people, right? And just like in life, the people in your organization are key to being successful. And you could be a Democrat, you could be a Republican, you could be black, you could be white, you could be Asian. It doesn't matter. If everybody buys into the core values that are unique to your organization, then, you're all pulling the oars in the same direction, as they say, then you're going to be pretty hard to stop. And so appreciating, it's not nebulous, it's structure. I hire, I fire, I, promote. You start to operationalize your core values. That's where the real value comes in. They're just not these aspirational things that you talk about. They are how you are making decisions.
Yeah.
I think makes it very powerful. And that was something that I thought I knew, but I clearly had no idea what I was talking about until EOS.
Well, that seems to speak to an intentionality of putting core values together for Evolution. And we've got some information in front of us that has the core values for Evolution on it. And, it makes out the acronym AGREE, accountable to our community, growth mindset, return on our energy. Everyone's a leader and embrace change. Is there anything you could speak to, of either a specific example of putting those into action or operationalizing those, or maybe a situation that others could learn from where you did hire because of that, or you recognized, you disciplined, or you eventually had to let go due to your values?
Not one of these is there an example, as much as the process that we went through to get these was really, really valuable in terms of, how we think about our business and how we wanted to work together and what skills were most important, really, to be, successful. Right. And I'm going to forget the name of it. It's the group that Thomas Jefferson sent out into the Louisiana Purchase to explore, the frontier before Lewis and Clark.
Sure.
And I look at what we do as a little bit of Lewis and Clark. You start out, you're well provisioned, you're going out into the unknown. You have a map. It's okay, but you're improvising, the whole way along. And you're making a lot of mistakes, but they're not existential, and you're kind of making your way back. And ultimately, you have huge success. But if you go down that analogy and back, it pulled out a lot of, what we were thinking about that was under the surface, but we couldn't put words to it. So, the word association, all that sort of stuff is important. A movie, a situation, a phrase, a story, these were all important elements to really get some deep thought into what was most important to us. And every one of these I love, and every one of these speaks to what you have to be good at evolution, to be successful. I can't say one or the other is more or less important than the other. And when we wrote it down, I was immediately go to an acronym to help me remember it.
Right.
And I was like, oh my gosh, it says agree.
And they're not pulled up on your phone. They're the wallpaper on your phone. Is that right? Yeah. So when you talk about living them, using them as a filter for decisions and all that, I mean,
why do I do that? I do that because I need to hold myself accountable to that.
Totally.
Right. And I think deeply about what have I done to exhibit those characters, not when times are great, but boy, am I having a really crummy week. Am I still maintaining that discipline?
It's your North Star.
Right.
Is my leadership team maintaining that discipline? That's why it's key. It's really helps you level set about, who you are and what you want the organization that you represent to look like to the outside world.
I was with a group last week, and it was the middle managers and some individual contributors, and we're talking about how to earn empowerment. It's like, folks, if you can justify your decision based off of your core values and said it represents it this way because of this, and tie it all together, even if it's not the way your leadership team would have made that decision, you're going to get another shot, right? Yeah. It's that, thinking about it the right way. And to bring it full circle, we were at an event with Kimberly a month or so ago where she was talking about retention and attraction of talent. And one of the sentiments that stuck with me was, if you are certain and have clarity around core values, be unapologetic. Even if that means you're quirky and weird and, these aren't aspirationals, they're truly you. That if you're unapologetic and you market those out as this is who we are, you will attract the right people. You will repel the wrong people. Right. It is a magnetic thing.
Right.
Right. And that really stuck with me. This has been great. I don't want to close it yet, but we got to hit just a couple more things in the next few minutes. And I want to make sure for those who maybe haven't considered, private equity or an outside party to help them grow their business, or to maybe be a part of succession planning for them, that they've always considered it just being, kind of second or third gen handoff in a family. What can you share with the founder or a leadership team where maybe this sparked some curiosity, maybe there was some conversation that resonated with them, but what would you say to somebody that, is probably ripe for some partnership with Evolution Capital Partners if it's not something they've even considered in the past?
So you start out with students and young people and exploring private equity. And what I always tell young students that say, I read 18 accounting books last month and 40 finance books and whatever, I'm like, go volunteer. The skill set that is most important in what we do is people. Accounting and finance is the table stake. You have to know that, right? But you really have to know you're evaluating people. And most importantly is you're trying to persuade them that your idea is the right idea. So if you think about what we do, I fundraise. I go to you and I say, hey, how about you give me money for 10 years? Let's be partners. And I go to you, hey, I know you've owned your business for 25 years, but why don't you give me the keys? And I'll kind of take it from here.
Yeah.
Those are tough arguments. Right. So you have to understand your value proposition. You have to understand the people that you're dealing with. And if you think about a volunteer situation, nobody has to pay attention to you, right? You have no authority over them. Only way to succeed is to persuade people that your ideas, are the best ideas. And so I think that that is the best way, to train in developing yourself, whether it's private equity or anything, is volunteer. These people aren't from your background. They're there for the same reason, hopefully, that you are. And so leverage that, just like your core values, to persuade people to that your idea is the right, idea. As far as everybody else is concerned, I say that private equity is transformational. You don't just take on private equity to take on private equity. There's got to be a reason to do it. You're going from point A to point B. I want to retire. I want to buy a competitor. The law has changed and we have this great new initiative. We've come up with this great new idea. We're going to change direction, but can't do that for free. Because once you enter into the private equity arena, you never go back. I mean, if you are a family-owned business and you want your son or daughter to own that business in the future, don't do private equity. Unless that is the stated purpose that, okay, we're going to, and there are those options are available. If things go well, you're selling to a larger private equity fund, you're selling to a strategic buyer, which is, a company that's in the industry or wants to be in your industry. So to me, what makes private equity so great is that it is transformational. You're doing something. And that gets back to Lewis and Clark thing. You're doing something, right. You're on a journey, and there is a defined end to our relationship, and this kind of what it looks like.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm sure there's uncharted things that happen, in a lot of those situations too, like a Lewis and Clark.
Always. I'm not sure any deal has ever ended up the way I thought. Sometimes a lot better and sometimes horrible, but it never ends up. So the best management teams are the ones that pivot, right? They're getting the information they need at the time where they have to make a decision, and they're reacting the right way because they've thought about it deeply and they know what they want to do.
Yeah.
Right. It never happens. And that's, frankly, what kids need to learn today is like, you're going to go up and down 1,000 times a week, right? It's not going to be, this wonderful 45-degree, line straight up all the time. You just got to fight your way through that and just have conviction about who you are. I've worked at my skills. I know I'm good at this. I've gotten feedback from people that I can, continue on, and you don't be afraid of failure,
So if a founder knows they need to make some sort of change, or maybe they're running into a ceiling that they just haven't figured out a way around, or they're like, I know I need to do something, or I know this organization needs some sort of transformation, that would be a situation when, they would want to get in touch with somebody like you.
Yeah. I mean, every fund has a different spin or different skill sets. And so I would definitely encourage people to look at, who they're partnering with, because there's 1,000 different flavors of private equity. They get categorized in leverage buyout and growth equity and all this other sort of stuff. But, I say that Father Time's undefeated, right? So if you're like 70 years old, you better start thinking about, a transition plan, because you don't want to think about it when you're on your way to the hospital with a heart attack.
No doubt.
That's not the way to handle that situation. And so it really depends on what you want to do and what the strategy is. It's going to, or the industry is really going to be what appeals to whoever the audience is. But, it's the internet's obviously the internet. And so it's easy to research this stuff and really get a handle on who you think the right match is for you. And frankly, these private equity funds are hungry for deals. There's $1 trillion of overhang of underinvested but committed capital looking for an investment.
Wow.
Right? I think it's $1.3 trillion or something like. When I got it doing this at Evolution, it's $300 million. It's mainstream now.
Yeah.
And there's just not enough product, as you say, out there, companies to invest in. So if somebody says, hey, I'm going to call this private equity fund, and they're going to take your call, right?
So it looks like a lot of the clients that you've worked with east of the Rockies, right?
Correct.
Industry agnostic.
We're business services. We really like regulated industries. We have done stuff on the West Coast, but I'm just tired of flying that far. So I
Don't
can
blame
get
you.
to Denver pretty easily, and Houston and Minneapolis and Chicago, and then obviously everywhere east. So honestly, Zoom has made it easier to think about more remote locations, east of the Rockies, but we do look at travel, as part of, an unstated consideration about whether we pursue something or not. 1 to 3 million of EBITDA or operating profit is important. Diversified customer base, high margin, like at least a 40% gross profit margin. To me, that's a direct expression of what your customers think about the product or service that you're delivering. Our core competency, though, is professionalization. I mean, anybody could benefit from, being a partner with us, because we just have been there, done that, and leveled up so many businesses over time.
I'll ask one more thing about that, because I think that's huge, right? I can understand why that would be the core competency. I'm sure that others in the private equity space would say something similar, right? It is our experience, the professional nature of it. But what about your uniques? So if somebody listening to this has continued to self-select and narrow down further, and the more that we get into it, like, all right, maybe this is something I should consider. If they're now at that stage of considering picking up the phone and talking to a couple people, I imagine Evolution Capital Partners has a couple things.
Yep.
As EOS would teach us.
I got my 3 uniques.
My 3 uniques.
You want to hear them?
You want to share them?
Yeah.
So the first is our market. I mean, I got into this industry because, the professional investment community overlooks this market.
Yeah.
These smaller companies that don't have the infrastructure, or they're not doing the things that make it user-friendly for that larger private equity fund. Like larger private equity funds want to make sure that your numbers are right, that you have a HR program, that you've got a 401k, that you have a CRM system. They want to work on governance, M&A, capital structure, those kinds of things. Not taking anything away from them. They're trying to buy businesses that are already killing it, right? So they're looking for something that they can grab, with right away. The second is our structure. Our option plan is twice as big as you're going to find in the rest of the market. We are willing to give away more to the successful owners. And it's double the size also because we tend to bring in the missing pieces in the accountability chart to level up the team.
Sure.
So that is, and then last is Evolution Pro, which is our methodology. We've got it on LMS, so people get online and 24/7 access to tools and the philosophy that they need to understand to be successful. So rather than waiting for me to spill it out to you on a phone call, you can get online at 3 a.m. and say, hey, really thinking about this. How would Evolution do it? So those are 3 uniques.
Love it. Where somebody wants to learn more, where do they go? What's the first step? What do you recommend they explore or look into next?
evolutioncapitalpartners.com is obviously, we try to push everybody to the website. And we also have I think we have like almost 3,500, 3,600, 3,700 followers on LinkedIn. So we actively post on LinkedIn. We used to do other platforms, but really focused in on, and I think that we're pretty accessible. We're advocates for small business owners. We want to see everybody succeed. We don't want to be the last no, so it's not good for us. We're going to try to refer you on to the next group. And I'll say Cleveland has the largest private equity community between New York and Chicago.
No kidding.
And it's a group of people I'm really proud to affiliate with. They're all pros. It's not something maybe Clevelanders generally aware of. This is people should be aware of, because they have national reputations, international reputations, a lot of great work, highly ethical.
This may be the first interview where I didn't specifically ask about storms you've charged into. However, I think it's because it sounds like most of your career, a lot of what you do are storms. It's the uncomfortable things.
Yeah.
Lewis and Clark
right.
lifestyle.
Yeah.
I thank you, Jeff.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks,
Jeff. I enjoy talking about our business and talking to people that are in the entrepreneurial world like you guys are. I go into every situation hoping and expecting I'm going to learn something, and I have today. So thank you for having me.
Same. Well, folks, thanks for tuning in as well. Take a look down in the description for the different resources and things that Jeff laid out today. We just really appreciate being here. I took something valuable from this. I hope that
me as well.
You did as well. And we look forward to seeing you next time.